Hey everybody, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to give you another classic RPG adventure review, Call of Cthulhu's A Painted Smile, a horror adventure that I guarantee you is unlike any other. Curious? You should be. Alright Cthulhu fans, well get ready for some tough sanity rolls and steel yourself for spoilers, because not only am I going to tell you whether A Painted Smile still holds up after 30 years, but I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to run it like a pro. A Painted Smile was written by Richard Watts and Keith Herber. It was included in Tales of the Miskatonic Valley, a series of adventures that explores the rural communities around Lovecraft country. The entire adventure is only 9 pages long, which means it can easily be run in one session. Now, as a disclaimer, I played this adventure as a player, not as a keeper. Keeper Jeff, as illustrated in this picture, did an awesome job running this adventure for our group, and I picked his brains a lot about what the challenges were as a keeper running A Painted Smile, so I'll try to represent them as best as I can. Now before I dive into A Painted Smile, I want to warn you that this adventure fits solidly in the B-movie territory. While most Call of Cthulhu adventures feature horrific elder gods and weird entities from other dimensions and cultists and disturbing locations, A Painted Smile feels a lot more like a budget horror movie that you'd watch on late night TV. So keep that in mind when you consider running this adventure. I'm not saying that that's good or bad, by the way, but I'll talk more later on about whether I think it works. The adventure begins when the investigators are contacted by an old friend, an author named Miles Truman. Miles is writing a book on New England architecture, and he needs the PCs to track down 2 sisters, Margaret and Mildred Hathaway, because they might have material on the origin of a particular window design. Now, this part of the adventure is not really described super well, so keepers are going to have to flesh out the introduction here a bit more for themselves and their players. When I played, Keeper Jeff told us that Miles was an old friend from college, somebody we liked a lot, and he was way behind on his deadlines, and he really needed our help. This setup alone just motivated us a little bit more to volunteer to help the guy out. Now, this entire opening of this adventure is a complete red herring. The rest of the adventure has almost nothing to do with this window or Miles Truman or those sisters. I kind of love it when Call of Cthulhu adventures mess with your expectations, because honestly everybody by now goes in with them with some idea that they're going to be asked to investigate something and get killed by some monster along the way, but this adventure starts it out a little bit differently. I thought that was a nice touch. So the investigators will travel across Arkham to find the 2 sisters, and when they arrive at their split-level house, they see an old blind lady, the woman that lives downstairs from the sisters, and her face is coated with this unusual white powder, and she's being teased by a bunch of children. They're singing and dancing around her and being mean and calling her a witch. She's screaming at them, and she associates the investigators with being with the kids. Now your players probably won't be too motivated to interact with Hilda. They'll probably just ignore her, or they'll just say some nice words and just maybe scare off the boys, and then they'll make their way upstairs to the 2 sisters. Now, the 2 sisters, they're nice and all, and they're actually happy to give the investigators the evidence that they need for their friend's book. Once they get the evidence, as they go to leave the house, 2 things happen. First, a crowd down the street appears. Apparently, one of the boys who was teasing Hilda has somehow drowned in a puddle. He's holding a white piece of lace in his hand, and obviously the neighbors are very upset about this. Soon after this moment, something horrible happens to poor old Hilda. At just the right moment, she calls out to the PCs and starts gasping and choking. She suddenly keels over and dies, and with her dying breath, the dolls in her house shudder and come to life. Ugh, well, that old lady sure died horribly. But at least she's got these cute dolls that we can give to those poor children outside. Did you guys just see that? Okay, now I'm going to stop here and talk about this moment. This is literally the best and worst part of this entire adventure. Now, when I played this adventure, We challenged Hilda on whether she was involved with the boy's death down the street. It seemed too coincidental to us, and we were kind of suspicious of this old lady at this point. And then as we accused her, she started having a heart attack, and one of our party members rushed forward to save her and give her like CPR, and she rolled a 100 on her first aid roll. So instead of saving Hilda's life, Hilda's rib cage just cracked open and there was gore everywhere and everyone had to make sanity rolls, and it was horrifying and we felt bad, and it totally felt right for a Call of Cthulhu adventure. But, and here's the big problem with this scene, what if we as players had critically succeeded in that first aid roll? What if we just ignored Hilda and said like, hey, we don't really care about this isn't our problem, and we're gonna go back to our friend with the evidence? What if we had just called the police and had them investigate Hilda? This adventure calls for Hilda to die, and die hating the PCs. Otherwise, it's just gonna really come off the rails. In fact, when I talked to Keeper Jeff afterwards, he was terrified that this adventure just wouldn't work at all based on this moment. Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, one of the things I suggest is to really play into Hilda's blindness. When the investigators first encounter her, she could mistake them for somebody else, like somebody she clearly doesn't like. She could call them by the wrong names and make up some past grievance that she's still really angry about. Your family cost me everything and take your boys off my lawn. Something like that. Be a great quote for her at the beginning to introduce her. This will really set up that there's some animosity between her and the investigators, even if it's just mostly in her head. Next, set up an accident that can happen to her in case the investigators don't take any action directly with her that's going to lead to her demise. For example, when the investigators first arrive, you could describe the steps to her house as being really rickety. Maybe there's rotten boards or exposed nails. Then, later on, when Hilda gets angry at the right moment, she could charge down the stairs and trip and break her neck or have something just horrible happen to her. This gives you a backup plan in case your players just don't really want to mess with this old lady at that critical point of the adventure. But honestly, you just have to be a creative and flexible game master to make this part of the adventure work at all, or really be willing to improvise when it inevitably goes a little bit off the rails. As Keeper Jeff told me, hey, if Hilda didn't die, I probably would have just pivoted you guys into Deadlight, which is another Call of Cthulhu adventure. Okay, so let's move on. Hilda's dead, and you're probably thinking, JC, did you just say dolls come to life? Yep, that's what I said. There's a whole backstory in this adventure about how Hilda, when she was younger, was in love with a man named Clyde Beckford. He was a rich guy, and there was a big class and status difference between the two. But they fell in love, and they promised each other that they would be in love with each other forever, and they made that oath at a place called Split Rock. Now, Beckford eventually, as these things always work out, he married a wealthy socialite, and he eventually spurned poor Hilda. Hilda's rage actually brought one of her dolls to life, and it ended up killing Clyde and his new wife by running across the road at night while they were driving. They steered off the road and got into an accident, and they all died. The adventure does try to tie this curse into the mythos. Like, it talks about how the place where Hilda and Clyde made their vow, Split Rock, was actually split by Yog-Sothoth, this elder god, and he kind of imbued it with this evil power.
Oh, of course it's Yog-Sothoth. Oh, he's a dirty little elder god. He just loves to insert himself into weird human relationships like this. Ugh.
But honestly, you could just hand-wave away all this backstory. I mean, the plot at this point, killer dolls coming to life, is so B-movie that trying to weave in a Lovecraftian elder god into this story at this point is just kind of pointless. I mean, an angry old lady obsessed with her lost love and her own dolls is just kind of better than a random Cthulhu god for this kind of adventure. Okay, so now the PCs are cursed by Hilda. And they have a problem that all of her dolls, hundreds of them, she was a famous doll maker, they're all over the place, are going to come to life and try to kill them. Now, this part, again, is going to rely on your keeper skills, because you want to slowly build up the tension with these dolls. Like, maybe one doll, as the PCs are leaving town, suddenly appears in their backseat and lunges at the steering wheel to try to make it spin off the road. Or as the PCs are walking away, a doll comes crashing out of a 2-story window and lands in front of them and tries to kill them or crashes into their heads. Just whatever you do, don't turn the rest of this adventure into Starship Troopers with dolls, because not only is that just going to feel ridiculous, but Call of Cthulhu is just a terrible system for mass melee combat. Actually, I would make a change to this part of the adventure if I were to run it myself. I would say that during the day, the dolls are these like sneaky little ambushers. They'll come to life, but they'll try to kill the PCs in more subtle ways, like I said, accidents or just things that seem kind of random. But at night, they come in packs, and that's when it really gets dangerous. And then in Call of Cthulhu, you can treat a horde of dolls or a swarm of them as just kind of a single entity to make sure the combat plays out, and they're really dangerous. This approach also gives the PC some breathing room where during the day they can do some investigation and they're not worried about like a horde of dolls charging over the hill to kill them, but they can have some time. But they know at night it's going to get worse. And eventually at nighttime, with all the dolls throughout Arkham gathering like an army, it's going to become unsurvivable. So this adds a timer into the adventure as well. The investigators can stop this curse in a few different ways. First, the adventure suggests that the PCs can go find a priest who can do a good old-fashioned exorcism. I'm not even sure why the adventure includes this as an option. It literally says go watch The Exorcist and do that in the text. So this kind of feels random and just totally unsatisfying to me. The next way the investigators can stop the curse is by liking and subscribing this channel. If you do, I guarantee you'll never get attacked by dolls, and you'll get more classic adventure reviews like this one. The best way to stop this curse of living dolls is by investigating the history between Hilda and Clyde, and discovering that during their vows, she said that she would never rest until her and Clyde were reunited. Now these leads can be a little tricky for players to find, because the adventure relies on the players thinking that they should research Hilda, and then this will lead them to the library where they'll find newspaper clippings about Clyde and Hilda and Clyde's death, which will then lead them to the Arkham Society where they can find some of Clyde's original belongings, including his diary, which has a short poem in it, which implies that the two wanted to be together forever. So I kind of wish this part of the adventure was a little bit more freeform for the players and that the clues were a little bit more scattered around. Because otherwise, again, you're just going to have to improvise as a keeper here when the players get a little stuck. Like, maybe the two sisters who live upstairs above Hilda have some leads on this. I mean, after all, Hilda was their neighbor for years and years, and they may remember that she was obsessed with Clyde and give the PCs some ideas on where to go. Or, inside Hilda's apartment, the PCs can discover maybe a giant stack of unmailed and kind of obsessive letters to Clyde Beckford. These things will just help lead the players in the right direction. When I was a player in this adventure, we eventually figured out that Hilda wanted to be with Clyde forever, and so we actually ended up stealing her body.
Wait a second, that was your idea, not mine. I just wanted to stay in the library and read about Yog-Sothoth.
We then drove her corpse to the cemetery where we cracked open Clyde Beckford's mausoleum and we tossed her body inside where they embraced, and the curse was ended and the adventure was over. Now I think there's something a little off with the ending of this adventure. It comes down to Hilda. I mean, Hilda's this like crazy, murderous old lady doll maker who can unleash curses on people. And yeah, she wants to be together with Clyde, but all you know is that Clyde never married her, so I kind of assume that Clyde figured out that she was a little crazy. So uniting the two of them at the end just felt really wrong, as a player anyway. I think the main problem with this adventure is that the writers want you to feel sympathetic for Hilda, but she really earns none of that. I mean, as a player, by the time we got to the ending of this adventure, I just had no tolerance for Hilda. I mean, she was angry at us from the beginning, she cursed us with her dolls, and so I kind of wanted to destroy her, not help her reunite with somebody who maybe realized that she was nuts and then she killed. I'm not sure how to fix this, or if it's even fixable. It's really hard to make Hilda sympathetic. Maybe as like a lightweight fix, if I ran this adventure once reunited, I would have Clyde's skeleton turn away from her, and then Hilda's body would recoil and wither and just turn into a disgusting white powder. That would have been awesome comeuppance for that old witch. So that's A Painted Smile. Now I will say, as a player, I had a lot of fun in this adventure, but I'll give most of that credit to Keeper Jeff, who was able to improvise, keep up the tension, and not just turn it into non-stop combat with dolls. Because as written, I think this adventure is a mixed bag. On the one hand, I think that A Painted Smile has great B-movie vibes. It would make for a fun Halloween one-shot, or if you want to play with newer folks or younger players who want to dabble in horror role-playing without it being too spooky or gruesome. But on the other hand, this adventure relies so much on players acting a certain way, so unless you're a really experienced keeper with excellent improv skills, I'm just not sure this adventure is going to play out. It's just too easy to accidentally miss triggering the main plot or just miss all the clues on the way to resolve it. In the end, I would say only run this adventure if you're an experienced game master who doesn't mind a lot of improv and you have a group of players that just will get into those B-movie shenanigans. If you've played in this adventure, please let me know how it went in the comments below, because I'm willing to believe that there's players on both sides of this one. Players who loved it for its kind of kookiness, and other players who just hated it because it went off the rails and didn't work for them. So please let me know how it went. Well, that's another classic adventure review. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, when the keeper tells you to make a first aid roll, rolling a 100 is more fun for everyone. How was that? Was that good?